Hi there, my name's Andrew with the American Heritage Museum, and today I'll be taking you for a tour of our M3 Gun Motor Carriage, both inside and out. Introduced in 1941, the 75mm Gun Motor Carriage M3 was the first designated tank destroyer to see service with the U.S., later being succeeded by designs like the M10 Wolverine, the M18 Hellcat, and the M36 Jackson. The M3 here is a stopgap design, intended to get a self-propelled 75mm anti-tank gun into the field, and it did so quite well. The idea of the American tank destroyer was born in the aftermath of the German invasions of Western Europe in the late 1930s and early 1940s, when it became increasingly clear that large-scale tank battles were an inevitability and the US had to prepare themselves. With that, tank destroyers like this aren't designed to throw themselves headlong into enemy tanks, but rather to act as self-propelled anti-tank guns, able to fire at enemy tanks from a distance, reposition, and fire again. Starting up here at the front of the vehicle, connected to the front bumper, we can see the unditching roller. Now this is designed to help keep the vehicle from getting stuck in a ditch if that ditch is entered at too steep of an angle. Now please refer to this high-tech visual simulation software to see a high-tech visual simulation of such an event occurring. Riveting. Also connected to the bumper, we have two tow hooks, and then on the radiator grille we have the armored louvers. Now these can be opened and closed with a lever found in the cab. Mirrored on both front fenders, we have headlights, blackout markers, and the headlight guards. Now, if you're wondering what blackout markers are, they're just very dim lights that you turn on at night when operating under light discipline. This is the practice of keeping off bright lights when in an area where the enemy could be so you don't give away your position. Now, I mentioned earlier that this vehicle is a stopgap, and what I meant by that is it's really just an M3 half-track with a 75mm gun bolted to it. And with that in mind, it does maintain most of the original characteristics of the M3 half-track, including the iconic boxy hood. This hood houses the white 160AX engine. It's a 6-cylinder, 386 cubic inch gasoline engine. It puts out around 147 horsepower and is capable of getting this 10-ton vehicle up to the blistering top speed of about 47 miles an hour. On a good day. Downhill with a tailwind. But it can do it. It was recorded. In terms of the front wheels, there's not a whole lot to say. They're regular rubber air-filled Goodyear tires, and they use leaf springs for their suspension. Moving now behind the fender, on the driver's side here, we have a jerry can, the pickaxe handle, and the shovel. And on the co-driver's side, we have another jerry can, the axe, and the battery box. The driver and co-driver's doors are mirrored copies of each other, each with their standard door handle, fold-down window, and vision port. Now, it is worth noting that mounted over the co-driver's side door, we do have the antenna mount for the onboard radio. Now, looking at the windshield, or lack thereof, we can see that the M3 GMC, unlike the half-track it's based on, doesn't have a glass windshield. This is primarily because the crossmember required to install the glass windshield, like this one here, would have greatly restricted the amount of depression available with the cannon. As it is, the steel windshield we have has a large notch cut out of it in the center to accommodate the gun. Moving backwards, the sides of the vehicle are rather simple, made up of two large plates of 1/4-inch steel. Now, underneath those, of course, we have the tracks, making this vehicle a half-track. On either side, we have a VVSS, or vertical volute spring suspension bogie. Inside of this assembly, we have two volute springs providing suspension for the 4 road wheels. Now, on top of this assembly, we have the return roller. In the front of the assembly, we have the sprocket wheel providing power for the tracks, and in the rear, we have the idler wheel providing tension. Now, interestingly, unlike tank tracks, the half-tracks tracks are made up of one continuous band, not multiple links or blocks. So this means that when it comes time to change the tracks, the idler wheel has to be relaxed to then pry off the track, prying on a new track, and retensioning the idler. Found on top of each sidewall is 1/2 of the barrel cleaning rod for the cannon. Now this is of course taken off and screwed together when it comes time to clean the main gun. However, in the case of this right side rod here, it's being used as an anchor point to suspend an extra camouflage net. At the rear of the vehicle, we have the taillights and blackout markers, the trailer electrical hookup, the tow hitch, a collapsible canvas water bag, as well as 2 large storage boxes, one on either side, and the man door to get into the rear. With the outside of the vehicle covered, let's start on the interior. Now, starting here in the driver's seat, we have all the standard controls for a 1940s-era truck. The M3 does use a 4-speed manual transmission, so of course we have 3 pedals on the floor, the clutch, brake, and accelerator pedals. Moving to the right, on the floorboards, we have the gear selector lever, which is kinked off at a weird angle to get around the parking brake lever. Moving to the right, we have the transfer case lever, allowing you to select high or low gear, and to the right of that, we have the front-wheel drive engagement lever. Now, moving to the left of the steering column, we have this incredibly useful diagram plate showing us what all the levers on the floor do and what position of that lever means what. Now, one of my favorite parts about American trucks from this era is this placard right here. This makes it so that just about anybody that knows how to drive stick can jump in and move one of these vehicles if need be, which is incredibly useful. However, it's also kind of a double-edged sword, because if a mischievous GI decides to take a vehicle on a joyride, it's rather easy to do so. Now, above the diagram plate, we do have the tachometer, displaying the engine RPM in hundreds, and to the left of that, we have a warning plate telling us not to operate the engine over 2,000 RPM until the coolant has reached at least 160 degrees Fahrenheit. Moving to the right, we have the variable electric load brake control rheostat. This is used to adjust the amount of braking applied to a towed load via the electrical hookup on the rear of the vehicle. To the right of this, we have the first of 2 large gauges. This one contains the ammeter, measuring the current draw on the battery, the oil pressure gauge, the engine temperature gauge, and the fuel quantity gauge. The second gauge is our speedometer, measuring the vehicle's speed in miles per hour, as well as housing the vehicle's odometer. Now, the really fun part about this speedometer is that it goes up to 80 miles an hour, which is optimistic to say the least. Between these gauges are the ignition switch, which has to be turned on to connect the battery to the rest of the electrical system, as well as the starter button. Now, the starter button does have a warning label of its own, warning that if the engine is not started on the first try, to wait until the engine comes to a complete rest before cranking again to avoid damaging the starter motor. To the right of the speedometer, we have the fuel tank selector switch. Now, this does not select which fuel tank you're drawing fuel from. It only selects which tank's quantity is being displayed on the fuel quantity gauge. To select a fuel tank to draw from, you have to open or close one of the valves found behind the driver's seat. The way that they're set right now, we would be drawing from the left-hand tank, as that valve is open, and the right-hand tank's flow would be cut off. Missing from the dash on this example is the voltmeter and its button. Now, this would be used to check the battery's charge when the engine is off by holding down the button, and that connects the battery and allows the charge to flow through and displays how much charge is in there. Above the voltmeter's opening, we also have a socket for a dash light. Over here, we have the glove box, although the manual does officially refer to it as the map compartment, and to its left, we have a small microphone hook. Scattered all over the dash, we have knobs and buttons for various things. Starting in the top left here, we have the panel light pull switch, as well as the main light switch, used to turn on the blackout markers, headlights, stop lights, and brake lights in different combinations depending on the setting. Moving down, we have a pair of vent pull switches, used to open the vents in the floor, allowing heat from the engine to come into the cab and keep your feet warm. And finally, below the gauges, we have the choke and hand throttle. Now, the choke is used to restrict the airflow to the engine, creating a richer air-fuel mixture, making it a little easier to start the engine when it's cold. And the hand throttle is used to regulate the engine speed during the warm-up period or during engine tests. This is not a replacement for the foot throttle. The manual is very specific about that. And lastly, we have the louver control handle on the extreme right of the cab, used to open or close those armored louvers on the grille we talked about before. Here in the co-driver's position, there's not really a whole lot to go over. The co-driver was responsible for operating the radio in the field. Unfortunately, this example is not equipped with a radio. The last thing to look at here in the cab is the travel lock for the main gun. This is just a bracket that locks into the 3 mounting points under the cannon to lock the cannon's elevation. Speaking of the cannon, it's time to head up to the fighting compartment. Now, to get to the fighting compartment, we go through the aforementioned rear door. The problem with this is that, unlike the half-tracks used to carry personnel, the M3 GMC has to carry a whole bunch of 75mm ammunition that the half-track wasn't designed to carry. Now, that's not a huge deal. You can retrofit ammunition boxes. That's fine. However, they did that, and when they did, they bolted them to the floor. And when I say they bolted them to the floor, I mean they put them on the floor and bolted them down. Now, this greatly increases the height of the floor, meaning that to get in, you can't just step up. You kind of have to climb on the tow hitch, and then step up onto the ammo boxes, and then you can get going. Let's start things off up here at the front with the gun we've been talking so much about. This is the M1897A4 75mm cannon. This is a derivative of the French 75, made famous by its widespread use and effectiveness in the First World War. Despite being designed in the late 19th century, this weapon was still plenty relevant come World War II. In fact, it fires the same 75 by 350mm rounds as the M4 Sherman, including the smoke, high explosive, and armor-piercing rounds. The M1897A4 uses an eccentric screw gun breech. So to operate this, you first depress the button on the handle before rotating the breech open counterclockwise. Then, a round can be loaded inside the chamber and the breech closed. And to fire, we don't have a fancy electric solenoid or anything like that. What we do have is a hammer with a rope tied to it. So, to fire the gun, you simply take off the safety, pull back on the lanyard, and release, allowing the hammer to drop, striking the firing pin, which strikes the primer, firing the gun. Then, before reloading, you have to manually open the breech again to eject the spent casing. To operate the gun, we have two elevation hand wheels along with one traversal hand wheel, with the gunner positioned here on the left and the loader on the right. In front of the gunner and loader's position, we do have a large steel gun shield surrounding the cannon that moves left and right as you traverse the gun. Also, on the left side here, we have a penetration and bracket for a gun sight. To the left of the gun here, we have a set of aiming stakes, an SCR 536 handy-talkie, as well as a pair of Bosch & Lomb binoculars for the commander. Below the gun, we have the ready rack housing 19 rounds of 75mm ammunition, as well as a bunch of tools and charts for calculating indirect fire, including an M1 gunner's quadrant. To the right, we have various tools and personal items, including some musette bags, rations, a mess tin, and some playing cards. On either side of the fighting compartment, we have seats for the crew, storage boxes, extra fuel cans, and the two 30-gallon fuel tanks. On the right side of the compartment, we have a pintle-mounted M19 30-caliber machine gun. Now, I'm personally a big fan of these pintle mounts, as they're really nimble, and it's a great way for the crew to lay down some defensive fire if needed. At the very back of the compartment, we have the fold-down seat for the commander, which is actually attached to the rear door and only works when the door is shut, as the seat part has to rest on the storage boxes on the floor. With that, the rest of the storage is found right underneath us, with space for the extra 40 rounds of ammunition, as well as any other tools and equipment the crew may need. And lastly, at the rear of the compartment, we have a few more crew belongings, including two M3 grease guns, a couple helmets, some cartridge belts, canteens, and extra ammunition bags. And that just about wraps things up. I really hope you enjoyed the video and maybe even learned a little something new. If so, consider leaving us a like and maybe even subscribing, as it really does help us out a lot. In the meantime, my name's Andrew with the American Heritage Museum. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.